Let's try to present brachial plexus in the simplest possible form, and let's try to make it as a separate presentation so that this information that really forms 5 major nerves of the upper limb becomes accessible very much directly without need to scroll through multiple videos and to try to find exact minute and second where the presentation of brachial plexus will be. As we know from our earlier studies, spinal cord yields from its surface number of spinal nerves, and the total number that we talk about is 31 pairs of spinal nerves. This number is somewhat different compared to total number of vertebrae, and that sometimes confuses people at the beginning of their studies. Why do we have on average 33 vertebrae and only 31 pair of spinal nerves? Since the spinal cord yields just 31 pair of spinal nerves, they are divided into the following groups. There are 8 pairs of cervical nerves, 12 pairs of thoracic, 5 pairs of lumbar nerves, and one last pair is single coccygeal nerve pair. Those nerves are going to be mostly mixed, and the term mixed means just one thing. A nerve which is considered mixed means it is composed of sensory fibers, so fibers that are having their signals processed and sent into the direction of spinal cord, and motor fibers are fibers that originate from within the spinal cord, and action potential signals or impulses are sent out into peripheral nerves until they reach appropriate muscle or group of muscles that need to receive innervation and stimulus for their contraction. Here in this diagram I tried to present on left side a cross-section through the spinal cord. We don't have to worry about any specific particulars, but we can see that spinal cord is composed of centrally positioned gray matter of the spinal cord that is surrounded by 3 columns of the white matter, the anterior, lateral, and the posterior column. That information will be of some interest for us later on when we speak about anatomy of the spinal cord itself, but for now just division of gray and white matter will be sufficient. As we see, 2 different colors were used, and I opted for this more or less standard color, red for descending or motor fibers, and blue colored fibers to represent sensory nerves, those ones that are carrying information into spinal cord. That is at the same time the only part of the nerve where we can see that sensory and motor fibers are physically separated into anterior or motor root of a spinal nerve and posterior or the sensory root of the spinal nerve. Of course, roots are only seen while the nerve is still entrapped within the spinal canal. Very quickly, both sensory and motor nerves will come together, and as a result of their merger, they will form the main trunk of the spinal nerve, and it has been illustrated here with this circle around blue and red colored fibers just to indicate that nerve comes out through the opening generated between 2 vertebrae, the intervertebral foramen. So that is the main trunk, which now really confirms what we have said earlier. Most of the spinal nerves are composed as mixed, having both sensory and motor fibers. But very quickly after the nerve has passed the intervertebral foramen, it'll split into 4 major branches typically, of which I only illustrated 2 to simplify this presentation. Other 2 branches that we would eventually want to mention are recurrent branch and also the white communicating ramus. Those branches will be interesting for us at a different point, but for now we are just to indicate 2 other branches that are very important. As we can see, blue and red colored fibers have been diverted more posteriorly to indicate presence of the posterior primer ramus, which is also considered to be mixed. If it makes any kind of sense, or if it's making it easier to memorize, the primary ramus, posterior primer ramus, is a branch of a nerve that is directed towards intrinsic muscles of the spine, like erector spinae, like splenius capitis, like multifidi, and of course its sensory branch will be also innervating patch of skin that is immediately next to the midline on the posterior aspect of the back. That is the smaller of the two branches. Larger branch becomes directed to what we consider ventral or anterior parts of the body. Anterior parts of the body in this case would be upper limbs, trunk, the rest of it, as well as lower limbs. So anterior primer rami are those ones that will take care and innervate most of the muscles of the body, and also will be much more present as nerves that innervate skin, usually forming a chart that is recognized as the dermatomal chart. Therefore, they're also confirmed to be made as mixed fibers. And as the anterior primer ramus is heading towards the rest of the body, we have to make here a little bit of a temporary stop and to confirm one of the important things that will require us to apply directly onto brachial plexus. We have roots of the brachial plexus as a term that we use, and I'm just kindly asking you not to mix it up. The anterior primer ramus of spinal nerve C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1, they would actually form the roots of the brachial plexus. So don't hesitate to think about and to use the term root of the brachial plexus instead of just thinking or incorrectly using term root of a nerve, which will immediately put you into this position to be within the spinal canal. So roots of the spinal nerves just compose a spinal nerve, and then with its division into anterior and posterior primer rami, it is the primer rami of 5 different nerves that essentially are to become roots of the brachial plexus. Okay, let's do it. So here we have 5 different anterior primary rami of spinal nerves, C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. I'm going to put here just quickly a letter R, and to identify that these are roots of the brachial plexus. Sorry, I just realized that letter R cannot be seen unless I put it a little bit lower down next to C5 nerve. So that is our starting position. The next thing that these 5 anterior primary rami need to do is to merge and to form 3 different trunks. So we're going to have the superior, inferior, and in between them the middle trunk of the spinal cord. So letter T is going to be placed over the section that we're going to illustrate and add some changes to indicate formation of 3 different trunks. This time things will become fairly simple and straightforward. It is C5, and then it is going to be C6 to come together. So we're going to have a nice combo of red and blue colored fibers that form the superior trunk of the brachial plexus. This time C7 is going to stay practically solo, and these white colored fibers, for which I'm using just a pen to draw thin lines, are to identify C7 alone as the middle trunk of the brachial plexus. Remaining green and black colored fibers will also get united. So we're going to have this situation, whereas these three in green and these three black colored lines will come together, and as a result of this merger we have here superior, middle, and inferior trunks of the brachial plexus. Alright, so that is step 2 out of 5 as we would need to complete before we can come to a point where the end of the spinal cord is pretty much seen. Next is a bit more complicated part where all three trunks, superior, middle, and inferior, will need to split and generate their own anterior as well as posterior divisions. So let me try to explain what exactly is going to happen and how do I plan to illustrate this part of the diagram. We need to create a mix of red and blue colored fibers that'll go this way. Couple of lines to go down in both red and blue. And then we're going to have some need to carry some of the red colored lines this way and to carry some of the blue colored lines this way. So if I can just point instead of writing, this will be anterior and this is posterior division of the superior trunk of the brachial plexus. Same will happen to the middle trunk. It's going to have its posterior division and it will have also its anterior division that I will just point superiorly. So I will put here letter A, anterior, letter P, posterior division. We're going to have this as the anterior and this bigger part will be the posterior division of the middle trunk of the brachial plexus. And once again we need to repeat the same thing with green and black colored fibers. So let me continue with a couple of green fibers this way and some black colored fibers as well to accompany them, go this way. So we need to go also with some green colored fibers up like this, and we need to add them also a couple of black colored fibers. So let's identify this part that we just drew. This is the posterior and then this is the anterior division of the inferior trunk of the brachial plexus. So we need to put over this part of the diagram letter D. So after roots, trunks, we have now gone through divisions of the brachial plexus. Next part, I'm sure that you're gonna like it a little more because it is going to allow again merger between different divisions, anterior and posterior divisions, but it is going to be quite schematic. So let me start with this. To identify that we have posterior division of the medial cord in the center, we're going to join it with some blue colored fibers coming from the above. Let's put just 2 so that we do not create a diagram that is too bulky. And let's also put here a couple of red colored fibers. And we're going to do the same thing with the green and black colored fibers coming also from the posterior division of the inferior trunk. So that's green. And let's do a few more fibers in black. So when you take a look and see what exactly happened in this area, you realize that we have put together the posterior trunks of the posterior divisions of the superior trunk, middle trunk, and inferior trunk. We put them all together. We're obviously heading towards next part of the brachial plexus and its arrangement, which we want to identify as three different chords. So let's put over the section of the diagram that we are still drawing letter C for chords. So all three posterior divisions have been used, and we generated what is called the posterior cord of the brachial plexus. And on this diagram you can see that we have red and blue and light blue and green and black colored fibers. So the posterior cord of the brachial plexus is really receiving a feed from C5, 6, 7, 8 as well as T1 nerve. Our next task is to create the lateral cord. So we're going to carry some of these red colored fibers. We're going to carry some of the blue colored fibers parallel to it. And then we would use the pen and we will run these light blue colored fibers across the posterior cord and allow them to join. So we just generated, on a basis of three different colors, what is known as the lateral cord of the brachial plexus. So in this case, we just allowed mixing of fibers between anterior chords of the superior and middle division to form what is called the lateral cord. So I'm going to put here letter L for lateral, letter P for posterior, and guess what? We really have just one more division that has been left alone and which has not been mixed with anything else. So for that reason I'm adding a couple of these black and few green colored fibers to ensure that we can see the continuity between C8 and T1. And of course letter which has to be added here is letter M. That is another thing that students usually have some difficulties memorizing or having a justification as what happened. Things are not so difficult to understand. Trunks, as we form them, superior, medial, and inferior trunk, they are really related to each other as one being on the top of another. That is how we see appearance of C5, 6, 7, 8, C, and T1 nerves. But in this particular section of three chords, the brachial plexus is already quite far away from the spinal cord, spinal column, and between these three chords we're going to find within the armpit, the axilla, a blood vessel which is the axillary artery. So relationship of these three chords of the brachial plexus is determining what kind of name we're going to use. So clearly the posterior cord is found posterior to the axillary artery as it runs through the armpit. Lateral and medial cords are for that reason seen further lateral or closer to the midline, medial, relative to same landmark, the axillary artery. Although between trunks, divisions, and cords, brachial plexus will be already yielding quite a large number of different peripheral nerves, our goal today is just to go and cover those 5 major nerves that are coming as 5 terminal branches of the brachial plexus. And these nerves are, of course, the axillary nerve, medial nerve, musculocutaneous nerve, radial nerve, and ulnar nerve. We need to present them also in a form that it makes sense and it makes things a little easier for everybody to remember. So let's go with the largest branch of the brachial plexus, which is coming directly from the posterior cord. In order to have it clearly denoted as very composite and very large nerve, we're going to have a couple of red colored fibers. We need to have some of these blue colored fibers into it. We have to use the pen to add some of the lighter blue or thinner blue colored fibers, as well as green and black. So when we do this, it is quite obvious that the composition of nerve that we're just drawing is going to be of fibers coming from 5 different tributaries. C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. And the product we generated on the basis of the posterior cord, that is the radial nerve. I'll put short forms only because it's much easier to leave a bit of extra space, as we're seeing radial nerve as just one of 5 major branches we need to identify. The posterior cord is not going to be that generous, as it is going to yield sideways just some fibers that should be in red and blue color, and I will put here, using blue pen, AX, identifying axillary nerve, which is the second terminal branch of the brachial plexus coming from the posterior cord. Axillary nerve carries fibers of C5 and C6, as it could be identified through this red and blue color, whereas the radial nerve was composed of C5, 6, C7, C8, and T1. So, let's make things even simpler. What's going to happen on the basis of the lateral cord and medial cord? Let's do the medial cord first, and let's carry some of the black colored fibers. Let's use 2 that are black, and let's use 2 green colors to put a nerve, which is the ulnar nerve, carrying only fibers of C8 and T1. So ulnar nerve is the direct branch of the medial cord of the brachial plexus. And if we do the same thing, like what is direct branch of the lateral cord, we're going to have a couple of red colored fibers. We're going to have to add some blue. Let's do it right away. And let's also put some of these pen colors, that is to identify presence of C7 within this nerve. And as I'm using the pen, we will put here the name. This is the musculocutaneous nerve, which is built on the basis of C5, C6, and C7 fibers, as they are present within the lateral cord. So with the musculocutaneous, axillary, radial, and ulnar nerve, we are short of one last nerve, and that is, of course, the median nerve. Median nerve will be done on the basis of lateral and medial cords and fibers coming out of it. So I tried not to really trick you, but first to give you those straight branches that are coming directly from these 3 existing cords, before I make things a little bit more complicated by saying here are some red colored fibers to go from the lateral cord. Here are immediately some blue colored fibers to come from the lateral cord as well. And we should not forget pen to be used in order to get some fibers that should be representing presence of C7. And that's one part of the median nerve. What do we need? We need some green colored fibers to be taken from the medial cord. Here they are. And finally, in black color, we need more fibers of T1 to get into this composite nerve. So as I don't have too much space, but we're going to put just MED for the median nerve, the 5th and last branch of the brachial plexus you and I had to go through. So let's confirm, and then we'll make a quick review of what was present. Musculocutaneous nerve carries C5, C6, C7. Axillary nerve is carrying only C5, C6. Radial nerve carries C5, C6, C7, C8, T1. So is the median nerve with C5 to T1 fibers. and Ulnar Nerve, which is left for us being composed of C8 and T1. So the last segment of the diagram we drew was something that we marked as branches, so for that reason letter B to come on the top of it. There is useful mnemonic that students are using in order to remember order of different parts of the brachial plexus and their appearance. R, T, D, C, B. Really, tired, drinks, coffee, black. So, roots, trunks, divisions, chords, and finally branches. Let us make a very quick review of what was done, and I'm going to start with the diagram that was used before. I'll just lay over this sheet of paper so we can quickly see it and confirm. It is the main trunk of a spinal nerve, which comes out of the intervertebral foramen, after which it divides into posterior and anterior primary rami. Both rami are mixed as they are composed of sensory and motor fibers, and the whole purpose of this exercise was just to confirm it is the anterior primary ramus of nerves C5, C6, C7, C8, T1 that are considered to be roots of the brachial plexus, not motor or sensory roots of a spinal nerve, but rather roots of the brachial plexus. So that is what we encountered on this diagram, 5 different roots, and quickly we put them into 3 different trunks: superior trunk, middle trunk, inferior trunk. C5, C6 blended together into superior trunk, C7 stayed alone, and C8 and T1 have formed the inferior trunk. 3 trunks, each of them split into its anterior and posterior division. So we've seen that anterior division of the superior trunk as well as posterior division, they have to carry both red and blue colored fibers. Same was done for inferior trunk, as both anterior and posterior division must have been illustrated carrying both black and green colored fibers. C7, the middle trunk, as it was made of only C7 fibers, we really didn't have too much work to do. And after 3 anterior and 3 posterior divisions were done, we simply wanted them to come together and to form 3 different chords. It was fairly simple to put all 3 posterior divisions of 3 different trunks together. As we merged them together, we got this kind of bulky structure that we named the posterior cord of the brachial plexus. Anterior divisions of the superior and the middle trunk came together, giving us the lateral cord of the brachial plexus, composed of C5 red, C6 blue, C7 nerve, pen being used, and last, third cord, the medial cord, was done only with anterior division fibers of the inferior trunk, carrying only C8 and T1. So it is that kind of merger as 3, 2, 1. 3 posterior come together, and then you have 3 anterior divisions in place. Anterior divisions of the superior and middle trunk come together, and last 6th anterior division of the inferior trunk does not further merge. On the basis of these 3 chords, their names are lateral, posterior, and medial, and remember all the names refer to position of the cord relative to axillary artery, so that is to be found within the armpit. They finally start producing terminal 5 branches of the brachial plexus. We started, and we will do it the same as well, from the posterior cord, simply saying all fibers C5 to T1 are required to go into radial nerve. But only some fibers have been diverted, which belong to C5 and C6, from the posterior cord to create axillary nerve, carrying C5, C6. The lateral cord of the brachial plexus, composed of C5, C6, C7, gave us as its straight branch, so to say, the musculocutaneous nerve, the one which innervates anterior arm, the biceps brachii, the brachialis, the coracobrachialis muscle, C5, C6, C7 into musculocutaneous. But not all fibers from the lateral cord were given into musculocutaneous, only some. Remaining C5, 6, 7 fibers have been diverted into median nerve. From the medial cord, some of the C8 and T1 fibers were sent out of the cord, and they produced the ulnar nerve as the direct branch, where the remaining C8 and T1 fibers were joining C5, C6, and C7 fibers from the lateral cord, and then we have had assembly of the median nerve. As something that I can throw in and pretty much wrap up this presentation is just to confirm, it is the axillary nerve that we found only within the armpit, innervating two muscles, the deltoid and teres minor. Musculocutaneous nerve was mostly seen as the muscle which innervates anterior arm, coracobrachialis, brachialis, and biceps brachii muscle. Its cutaneous branch continues further down to the forearm, so it's a reason for which the nerve is called the musculocutaneous. Radial nerve will be seen throughout the posterior arm, so unconeus and triceps brachii muscle, plus all 11 muscles of the posterior forearm are innervated by a radial nerve. Interestingly enough, radial nerve will not have any innervation for muscles within the hand. That is left for the ulnar and median nerve, which were using their innervation skills to do anterior forearm, where the median nerve obviously was more important. Ulnar nerve, of all the muscles of the anterior forearm, innervated just flexor carpi ulnaris and the medial half of the flexor digitorum profundus. All other muscles of the anterior forearm innervated by median nerve. Obviously, median and ulnar nerve are getting into the hand. Median nerve is going to pass into the hand also through the carpal tunnel. And with ulnar nerve, things are going to be a little bit easier. Nerve is passing superficial to the carpal tunnel, so it cannot be compromised with the same problem such as carpal tunnel. And within the hand, they somewhat reverse their roles. For the hand, for the intrinsic muscles of the hand, the ulnar nerve becomes much more dominantly present, whereas the median nerve will only be seen as it innervates what we can say it's a group of muscle that we can define using the acronym LOAF. Once we come into the hand, once we talk about muscles of the hand, intrinsic muscles of the hand, we will also decipher what this acronym LOAF actually stands for, but it only points out to really like a very minor number of muscles within the hand innervated by the median nerve. Anyway, I hope that this is going to be somewhat helpful, if not so helpful on the first seeing or first hearing. At least you can come always back and forth multiple times and try to sort out the brachial plexus on your own. Remember, really tired drinks coffee black. Which reminds me, it's the time when I can consider also that I'm a little bit tired, maybe not really, but a little bit, that I might have deserved another cup of coffee for me this afternoon. Stay well, talk to you soon, see you soon, bye-bye.